How do you see the current trends in regulation for protecting fisheries workers?
No small question. I believe that the push to address forced labor and illegal fishing is important, but I think we can't just look at forced labor.
What are the recipes and efforts to improve Thailand's fisheries that can be example for Indonesian, especially aspect of the protection and management of the fishing group?
I'm not sure I agree with you
Why?
that Thailand is more advanced than Indonesia.
Back again with our podcast, Destructive Fishing Watch Indonesia podcast. We are talk about ocean, migrant workers, and fisheries with me, Adeline. So today we have special guest come to our office, Judy Gearhart. Hi, Judy.
Hi, Adeline.
Thank
you.
Thank you for coming to us.
Thank you for having me.
So before we start our podcast today, let me explain a little background about her. Judy Gearhart. That's
good.
Spelled right? She is a visiting scholar at the Accountability Research Center since 2020 and a young professor at Columbia University since 2001. And she is also co-teaching the course Human Rights and the Politics of Inequality. Previously, Mrs. Judy served 9 years as the executive director at International Labor Rights Forum and 12 as the program director at Social Accountability International. Wow. She has worked for UNICEF, the International Labor Organization, and grassroots NGO in Mexico. Mexico, right? And Honduras on trade, labor rights, gender equity, and democratic participation. And her current research is focused on the nexus between government and corporate accountability and transnational organizing strategies. Wow. Can you imagine that? So long experiences. That's why we have she today. And then we can ask a lot, I guess, about human rights and everything. So it's our pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you today in the FWA podcast. So,
Thank you. You've done your research. I forgot about some of that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because that's your experiences. You have a lot of experience. That's why we invite you to come to have a sharing knowledge in our podcast. So, it is okay if I just like asking you a question and then you can just answer, okay?
Okay. And you can cut me off if I go on too long.
No.
Yeah.
Maybe all of your no, because you are very expert, I guess. So you can just saying whatever. Then yeah, I will ask and then maybe adding some information. Okay, so you are observed a lot and researching employment issues, especially in the capture fishery sector. But the problem of forced labor in fisheries is a problem in developing countries and even in developed countries, especially in Europe. It is still occur and it's reported recently. How do you see the current trends in regulation for protecting fisheries workers?
No small question.
Yeah, of course. That's why we have this podcast, so we get the knowledge from you, your perspective.
So I think the international regulations are the infrastructure or let's say the framework of international regulations exists. If you look at the Port State Measures Agreement, the Cape Town Agreement, and ILO Convention 188 for work in fishing. If you put all three of those together, you can start to create protections for fishers, for the safety of fishers on the vessels and for the treatment of fishers on the vessels.
Okay.
The question is, how do you make sure those are implemented effectively at the national level.
Yes. Are the regulation is already sensitive to human rights, or you think that's still needed improvement?
Well, as I said, you have the regulations, but then the question is the implementation.
Yeah.
And so I'm here to learn from you about how Indonesia is working to implement international human rights in the fishing sector. I believe that the push to address forced labor and illegal fishing is important, but I think we can't just look at forced labor. We have to look at the whole integral body of human rights and workers' rights. If workers don't have the right to organize and bargain collectively, or they don't have access to remedy or protections for their health and safety on the vessels, then we have them there. Then they tend to be more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Then they are more vulnerable to forced labor. Let's be
Yes.
clear. We can't stop forced labor if we don't also enable fishers to speak up and organize.
So you mean that we need to enable fisher to speak up? How? How from your perspective, is there any like movement or like education for the fisheries worker to speak their rights and everything? Because as I know, they don't have many media to cover their problem, some kind like that.
Yeah.
What do you see about that?
Well, for sure, it's challenging,
Yeah.
especially when you are talking about migrant fishers. And everybody has a role to play: civil society, business, and government. Fishers need to have the right to organize and join trade unions, but trade unions also need the capacity to be able to reach out and organize fishers. NGOs and other civil society organizations also can play a supportive role in educating migrant fishers before they go abroad, in providing legal aid when they need help. But the government has the government still has the primary duty for protecting fishers when they go abroad, for protecting migrant fishers. And the corporations, of course, still have a role, and those responsibilities of the corporations come the buyer level, the manning agency level, and the employers who operate the fishing vessels.
Yeah, everyone has a role, as you said. Yeah, okay. So, the second question. Everyone has a role. So, the National Fisher Center that managed by Destructive Fishing Watch Indonesia throughout 2019 until right now received many complaints from Indonesian, for especially Indonesian crew members who working on Chinese flag vessels. So far as our data, there have been 93 complaints and 283 victims. Some victims died, deceased, and disappeared, also abandoned, and then they get tortured at a fishing vessel. They work on China long distance fishing fleet. Is there any information or from your perspective why there are so different how to say uh how why in Chinese fishing vessels, like there are a lot of horror in that fishing vessel? Have you ever heard about that? Why, or why it's different between one fishing vessel, like one country fishing vessel and the other country fishing vessel? Have you ever heard about that, and what do you think?
I have heard about it, and I want to avoid saying one culture is worse than the other. I will say that the that China has the largest fishing fleet in the world, that they're fishing aggressively all over the world, not only in Chinese waters, but international waters off the coast of Africa, off the coast of the Southern Cone, in and around the Galapagos Islands in South America. We've even seen boats coming into port in Ecuador where Chinese boats with Indonesian fishers asking for help.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So these reports are occurring. How do we solve them? I think we need to engage the Chinese government and ask them to have better policies, to have better protections. And we need to inform the migrant fishers before they go abroad. Most of the time, they're not hired directly by the Chinese fleet. They're hired by manning agencies.
Yes.
And so the one thing that Indonesian civil society and government can do is first start by monitoring and regulating the manning agencies and informing the fishers before they go abroad.
Yeah. Okay. There are three conclusion. Yeah, because engaging, informing, and also monitoring. So yeah, and then the next question: Indonesia is one of the countries in the world that has not ratified ILO Convention 188. So we're talking about that before. So there are many reasons, but among others, that most of the Indonesian fishing fleet is small. They have a lot of small fishing, small fishing scale.
Small scale fishing.
Sometimes it's so hard. Small scale fishing.
Well, your English is better than my Indonesian.
Yeah, but still. And then there are many reasons. The area of operation is in the Indonesian territorial area, and there are no migrant crew members on Indonesian ships. In your opinion, what is the urgency for Indonesia to ratify the C-188 then?
Oh, I think Indonesia has several reasons to ratify C-188. First of all, because Indonesia does have large fishing vessels, and those fishing vessels would be improved if there was monitoring and regulation of the conditions, the worker contracts, and the conditions on those vessels.
Yeah.
C-188 has exceptions, so it would not be a burden for the small scale fishers.
Okay.
So that's number one.
Yeah.
The other reason is Indonesia sends a lot of migrant fishers abroad.
Okay.
And if you want to protect those migrant fishers, you want to push for more countries to ratify and implement C-188.
Yeah.
And if Indonesia ratifies C-188, it continues to show its leadership in the fishing sector, and it will be able to better encourage other countries to ratify C-188. Let's just say, as I started in the beginning, we have the international regulations, and those those are the three key international standards for protecting fishers.
Okay.
And if you ratify all three, then you've really begun to build the infrastructure.
Okay.
But let's be clear, it's not just the international regulations. Once you have that, then you have to implement it.
Yes. There's a lot of homework, but I think that's really nice if we have like triple play, triple play like in baseball. Yeah, right now we still I think, I don't know, the current condition about the C-88, but Indonesia still think about that, I guess. So there are three: Port States Measurement Agreement, Cape Town, and the C-88.
C-188.
C-188. If Indonesia is doing the three, then it will be make Indonesia one of the leader who apply to protecting the fishery worker, right? Whew. It's such a very, very hard to understand, but we have a lot of information from the experts. So then the fourth one, Indonesia is the second fishery producing country in the world. But in terms of exports, Indonesia is outside the top of 10. So it's not really good, I think. But you see the market share for exports of Indonesian tuna product is only like 5.2% in global trade. What do you suggest for Indonesia to increase fishery exports?
So, are your numbers talking about volume or value?
Value, I guess.
Because the first thing Indonesia could do to increase the value of its exports is to help Indonesian fishers with the processing and the refrigeration of the fish.
Mhm.
There's an interesting ecosystem beyond just the ecosystem of the fishery. But if we could think about a world where the fishers had the capability
Okay.
to process the fish more
Yeah.
quickly, they could sell it at a higher price,
Mhm.
which means they could potentially catch fewer fish
Mhm. But
and make the same amount of money.
oh,
If they
okay.
catch fewer fish, you have replenishing fish stocks.
Yeah.
So it also becomes easier to catch the fish you're catching. It's this whole sort of market ecosystem of
Yeah.
you could potentially spend less time fishing, catch fewer fish, and make the same or more money if you have higher valued fish. What needs to
Yes.
happen to make that possible is to look at the infrastructure of getting how you get that fish to market.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the homework, I guess, to increasing the value. Yeah. But do you have any suggestion how?
Well, I don't the from what I've read, and you are the experts on Indonesia.
No,
But
really.
from what I've been learning while I'm here is that there are more than 1,000 ports in this
Yes.
country, and there's not adequate infrastructure for refrigerating the fish.
Yes.
A lot of medium to large scale fishers are still looking for the investment or the ability to upgrade their equipment so they
Yeah.
have refrigeration or access to refrigeration quickly once they catch the fish. And this is especially important for tuna. If you can sell the tuna at grade A instead of grade C, you're going to make a lot more money.
Yeah. You have experience doing research in Thailand. In your opinion, why are Thailand fisheries so advanced? And Indonesia is, yes, we're still lagging, right? Because I say the data before, and whereas previously Indonesia was a source of raw material for the Thai fishers. What are the recipes and efforts to improve Thailand's fisheries that can be example for Indonesian, especially aspect of the protection and management of the fishing group?
I'm not sure I agree with you
Why?
that Thailand is more advanced than Indonesia. I have to say, I think the challenge in Thailand remains that they have a majority of migrant fishers who do not have the right to organize or bargain collectively.
Oh.
And many of them continue to be at risk, deportation, or not receiving certain social services. Indonesia, for the most part, on the Indonesian fleet, it's Indonesian workers.
Yeah.
And from what I've understood, there are efforts to try and protect those fishers. Maybe you don't have all the infrastructure that's needed
Okay.
in all the different ports for those fishers. But
Okay.
I think the countries are different. I don't know that I can say one is more advanced than the other,
Yeah.
as much as both are struggling to find ways to protect fishers.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I can understand. Countries is different. Yeah. Maybe Thailand is better in some ways, Indonesia better in one ways, right? Something like that. Or
Right. So, for example, Thailand has port in, port out inspection stations in their ports,
wow.
but
Okay.
they haven't really been as effective as people hoped they would be.
Oh.
And there needs to be more civil society monitoring and trade union monitoring of those port in, port out stations. If Indonesia sets up the integrated port monitoring program, then that needs to still be monitored by civil society.
Okay.
It's really a question of you have to put the regulation in place, then you have to implement it, and then you have to keep monitoring to make sure the implementers are accountable to the fishers.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I just know that they have a people port in, port out station. Okay. Yeah. So next question. So currently, DFW is an Indonesian NGO that focuses attention on the issue of protecting crew members. DFW has built and managed the National Fisher Center as a center for services, complaints, and information for fishing crew members. The coverage of the NFC is domestic and migrant crew members. So I think that's for the last question. It will be sum up like what suggestion for us. We can say that we are a civil society, right? Can you give therefore for more effective advocacy or campaign work or monitoring things that maybe can help Indonesian more good to monitoring what is already regulated and need to be implemented. Please.
Yeah, I think the National Fishing Center is a great concept. I like the idea of expanding more locations. I think having those kinds of centers where fishers have a place they can go, where they can find help when they need it, and also where you can track and the data that the government is producing or monitor the integrated inspections, for example. Having those fishing centers at different ports across the country will be incredibly valuable to protecting both migrant fishers and domestic fishers. My only thought on it is to really continue what you've been doing in terms of collaborating with other civil society organizations and trade unions. Because you have Indonesia, as I've told you, it's really blown my mind.
Okay.
The number of ports.
Yes.
And how much you have to do to protect fishers at that many ports. Yeah. So the more collaboration you have, and the more you can spread the outreach to more places, the better.
Wow. So we hope that we can expand to other ports to help more migrant worker or domestic crew member fishing vessel in Indonesia. Thank you very much, Judy, for your information and knowledge that you share with us.
Oh, thank you, Adeline, for all of your help in my learning about what's happening here in Indonesia.
But still, I'm learning from you because you have a lot of experience. But yeah, that's our podcast. This is our third podcast about migrant fishing worker around the world and especially in Indonesia. Hope we can learn from what we have today. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima
Bye-bye.
kasih.
Oh, terima kasih. Yes, terima kasih. Sama-sama. Thank you, JD.